And we're back with another session of NX Office Hours, where I already got the tweet out there, but I think everybody knows, or most of you know why we're here. We're here to answer your questions about NX and NX Cloud and the NX community. You've seen my face enough times. And back again is another one of our co-hosts, Philip. You've been on the show before, but for the people who don't know, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey y'all, I am an engineer here at Nrwl, working on NX, and of course working on all of our beautiful client projects so that, when we come to you with NX advice, we are, it's all experience. It's stuff that we've seen with our larger clients, and I'm really excited to always come out to the community. I will also shout out to the community of, I'm always learning things about NX. Even within Nrwl, we don't know everything. And there have definitely been times like articles from our community have helped me out, like solve a problem on NX. And I always think we should do something about that and get some of this information into our documents. But in the meantime, all the community articles are great. Everything the folks are sharing about how they, build with NX and how they're excited about NX is great to hear. So I'm always excited to talk to y'all, and I'm really excited to be here.
Cool. Thanks again for coming on.
Anytime.
And thanks for those people in the chat room. If you have questions, we already have like a slew of questions that were posted before we even got started, which is great. And we'll try to answer as many of those as reasonably possible, because we also have other questions that people have asked on Slack and on Twitter. If you have a question and you're wanting to post it on Twitter, use the NXQA hashtag. I'll pop that up there. For the people who are maybe watching in the future, you can use that hashtag to ping us with questions that we'll try to answer here. And if we can't answer them here, we'll go back and talk to other Narwhalians and find an answer for you. So with that, we'll get right into a couple of the questions we have. And the first one is, we get this question a few times about people wanting to move to NX and how can I get my feet wet with NX, if I have an existing Angular workspace to use NX.
Yeah, so I can jump in on that. So you can definitely at any point transition an Angular workspace to an NX workspace. We have a great guide to doing that exact thing in our documentation. Is there any way to post a link up on the screen, or should I just share real quick?
Yeah, you can share.
All right, let's try sharing real
I'll
quick.
pop the question up here. But the question is there any way to convert an Angular workspace we get more proper, an Angular CLI workspace to an NX workspace? Yeah, and we've worked on this before, like you said, adding documentation to show people how you can do this in a couple of ways. And we probably need to, I'm sure we need to update the docs, but we've worked on making this process easier also for existing workspaces.
Yeah. So there is one caveat here that as long as your Angular CLI workspace only has a single project, and by default, that's how a lot of projects are set up. That's essentially you have one app that's inside of your source directory, and you're building everything inside of that. If you have anything like buildable or publishable libraries that are also part of your Angular CLI workspace, we can't do those sort of automatically right now, but it's definitely something that's in the pipeline. It's something that we're working on. In the meantime, we have this great document here at nx.dev. I'll show you the URL there, and we'll get that posted in the show notes. But essentially, you're using ng-add, just like you would to add a lot of the functionality that you need for your workspace. And this little bullet list is actually going to give you an idea of everything that's about to change about your workspace, because we do structure things a little differently than an Angular CLI workspace will be able to do for you. So this is the easy method. And if this works for you, awesome. And we try really hard to make sure that it does work for as many different scenarios as possible. So there's definitely this of transitioning. There is also a transitioning manually. And so this is essentially you're creating a new NX workspace and then migrating your code into the NX workspace. And the migration there I'm talking about is essentially it's copying and pasting. So you make a new NX workspace and then you copy all your code into the right places. And this is probably what you're going to have to do for, if you have multiple projects inside of your Angular CLI workspace. Again, we're working on making this a little bit easier. But we have a pretty good document here. If you run through this and you run into any problems, reach out to us on Twitter. There is the Slack community that's available for NX. I'm sure there are folks in there that'll help you, and we also chime in from time to time. So in terms of transitioning from an Angular CLI workspace to NX workspace, definitely doable. With that little caveat of multiple projects, but this is your one stop for being able to figure out how to do that for yourself.
Yeah, I think definitely. And like I said, this guide came out of us migrating Angular CLI projects to NX workspaces themselves, and kind of has evolved over time. As you mentioned before, I'll show the link up here so people can see that, so you can join our NX or Nrwl community Slack workspace. So now we'll add these links, or the actual links, in the show notes. You can click on these instead of looking at trying to type it in from the screen there.
I assume everyone's just like scrubbing and like freeze framing everything that I do so they can get that URL. That's how useful that was.
Yeah. I'll also add, like I said, this need to add this to the docs also, but there's an option to where it's still all the things that you said still apply, but you can use the ng-add or nx-add at Nrwl workspace and use the preserve Angular CLI layout option, and it will add NX to your workspace without moving all your files around. So you can still keep your, like I said, it's still for a single project, that you can use there, and we'll add, like I said, the files that NX needs to work in your Angular CLI workspace. But then you get to take advantage of like local caching, and if you're familiar with the other command, the make Angular CLI faster, that's been circulating around, which essentially does the same thing. And I'll put that up there, npx make Angular CLI faster, which will add NX to your existing workspace without having to move into apps and libraries, and then allow you to more easily migrate to an NX structure over time. So definitely some options there. For you. So yeah, okay, we have a few more questions in the chat, and I guess we'll look at a couple more of those before we take on. We'll get to one of these other questions, and then we'll take some questions from the chat. The next one which is an interesting one, because it kind of leads into some things that we talked about that are coming up in later versions of NX. And the question was, what are the first things I can look at to reduce my build times? If you're working on a large application, and like I said, you have a large project that maybe you just moved into an NX workspace, what are the things that you can do to, like, if you, like I say, long build times, you have a lot of features within an application that aren't broken up, what are some of the things you can do to help that application build faster, or even just the other things around it, building and testing? What can you do there? So my first recommendation is, if you just move to an NX workspace, is to start breaking your application up into smaller libraries. And also to add on to that would be if you can generate buildable libraries from those packages, even though you may not be publishing them to NPM, if you have them just as internal libraries within your workspace, you can generate those libraries and kind of move those pieces of code into those features, or move those pieces of code into those smaller libraries. And once you have the buildable library set up within your workspace, then you can take advantage of the caching that comes with NX locally. And that also will work if you're using it with NX, across multiple teams with NX Cloud also. Just because you can take once you build it in your machine and then it gets pushed up to NX Cloud, then other people can use those same artifacts as on their machines. So that's one easy win you could have for when you've migrated to, or not migrated to, but if you have a big project that you have in an NX workspace that you haven't broken up yet, and you're seeing larger build times that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, for sure. And to sort of to be a little to add a little bit there. So typically if you have applications and and you're using the affected command, remember the affected command is going to make sure that if you have multiple applications, you're only ever going to be building whichever application is actually affected by your changes. And so, like Brandon is saying, breaking things down into smaller libraries. If you have a single library that's actually relied upon by all 5 of those applications, anytime you make a change to that one library, that's going to, instantly, make you rebuild all of those applications again. And so, number one, breaking things down into smaller libraries may result in, okay, we actually have some functionality grouped together that doesn't need to be grouped together right now. We can break that up into multiple libraries so that maybe these 2 libraries rely on one small subset of it, and the other applications rely on that. That said, what we tend to see is Victor Savkin, one of our co-founders, has referred to this as like the diamond shape dependency, where essentially it's always going to come down to you have applications at the top, a lot of feature libraries that are fairly well separated by API. And so you sort of have a skinny top and a fat middle where all your functionality is kind of hosted in these feature libraries. And then down at the bottom is this sort of essential set of shared functionality that you're going to need in each one of these features. So things like things like user information, authentication information, these are going to be things that are going to come up in lots of different features. And so all of those features are going to be pointing to, sort of that one library. So if you're making changes within those sort of really essential libraries, you're going to be triggering builds like all the time. And so what's really important is when you're thinking about how this architecture is laid out, the recommendations that we give to our clients are, core versus shared functionality. Whereas core is those things like authentication, anything related to like route guards, and those are like really, really essential things. Environment configuration, anything that you need to really bootstrap the application. That's got to be that we sort of call that core, because essentially your application really doesn't work without it, and it's essential information that all of your feature libraries are going to need access to. That's something that just about everyone's going to rely on, and so you have to be very careful with it, because when you look at those core libraries, at the beginning of a project, you're probably going to see a lot of churn in things like authentication and environment configuration. But there's got to be a point in your project where you stop making changes to those, right? Like you can only be so authenticated. There should
I didn't know there was there was levels of authentication.
You know what? I've definitely seen organizations that have like super authenticated. You know, like you are a super duper. You've been authenticated more than once. So you know, if you can hold changes to those core libraries to a minimum over the long-term course of the project, then that's going to reduce the amount of time that you spend in like these hour-long builds for like 5 applications. At the very beginning of like a greenfield project, yeah, you're going to churn amongst those things a ton, and you're going to trigger builds to all your applications all the time. But ideally, your applications are so small at the beginning of the project that's not a big deal. So as your project matures and it takes longer and longer to build, you've separated that sort of core functionality that everybody needs into, you know, sort of this set of core libraries that you know, hopefully the change should slow down on them. On the other end is shared libraries. And shared libraries are a place where you're probably going to see like a lot of churn. There's going to be things where you have, you know, some shared UI components where the behavior of those is going to change over time. Maybe you're implementing a design system and you're just like adding. And so those are another place where you can get a lot of change that's going to trigger a lot of rebuilds on your applications. And this is where you have to, that what Brandon's talking about of breaking things down into smaller libraries, that's where you can start to control how often all of your applications have to be built. And so the example there is if you have a single library that has all of your shared components in it, then anytime you make a change to any of those shared components, it's going to trigger a ton of rebuilds. If you separate your shared components into separate libraries, now you stand a better chance of, you know, when you make a change to the date picker, only, and it's in its own library, then only applications that rely on the date picker are going to be triggered for a rebuild. So that's a balancing act within these shared libraries of you want to break them up so they're really small and isolated, and you know, you're not re-triggering rebuilds for something that something doesn't actually use. But you can also go buck wild with these and end up with like hundreds of these shared libraries.
It's you're choosing like between like the Angular material approach, where like every single thing is a library in itself, or something more like what Angular material used to be, where everything was under the Angular material work or scope or package name, and then having to, you kind of weed out the things through the imports instead of through the libraries themselves.
Yeah, you're going to have to make these calls on your own, and we can't necessarily tell. Creating new libraries is cheap. It's not free. Like there is a certain amount of like headspace that you have to occupy by having certain numbers of libraries. Obviously, adding more and more libraries is going to add more and more files and more directories, and making sure that those stay nicely organized is a problem. So, you know, have small dedicated libraries. Maybe a library per component is too much. But that's not for me to say. That's a thought that I've had rattling around in my own head of like, could I just have like all the form controls in a single library instead of having, you know, like an input library and a select library? And I don't know. But those are definitely, you know, you can think of, you know, reducing your build times in terms of like the tools that we use to sort of like pre-build and cache things. You can also think about how you sort of construct those libraries and how your entire project is kind of laid out there.
Yeah, definitely. And we do have, well, I will say we have some doc, at least on the topic of libraries. If I can bring up the page here. We do have at least some guidance there on whether should you make a new library versus adding to an existing one. Because those, like you said, at the end of the day, there's still a choice that you have to make as a user of what works best for your situation. But it kind of lays out the differences of, you know, those two options. So if you haven't looked at that, we'll link of course, link that in the show notes. And this applies to, this is, I guess, showing specifically for under the Angular framework, but creating libraries in general, regardless of your stack that you're using, whether it be Angular or React, is still a good conversation to have as far as the trade-offs go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so let's see if we can dive into some of the comments here in the chat, and then we'll run through some of those, and then we'll talk about one thing that I saw recently, which is the scam approach with components and modules. So let's see. This first one, we're just scanning through here, so we're going to pick a few out. This one says, is there a better way for running multiple projects at the same time or using NX Run Mini for target, and then they have projects here and running in parallel? I guess I'll leave that one up there. The first thing that comes to mind for me, and maybe you have a different recommendation here, but as opposed to using the run mini command manually every time, I would consider using the run commands builder that lets you essentially do what something similar to what run mini does, and kind of group a bunch of tasks together that you want to run in parallel. So this is in the docs also for running custom commands, where you can define, if you're familiar with the architect configuration, like in your workspace.json, if you're just running a vanilla NX workspace, or Angular JSON, if you're primarily Angular CLI workspace, you can define builders that allow you to run tasks or targets targets make use of builders to execute tasks. And the Nrwl Workspace package has a run commands builder in it that you can put custom commands in, whether this be one or many commands to run various tasks. So if you wanted to serve up a back-end project and run a front-end project in parallel, you can do that with a pretty straightforward example. I'm looking here to see if there are any ones in here that have multiple, like this one has multiple commands in it, where you can make a directory or create a file and then change permissions on that file and run those, or not in parallel, so they run sequentially. Or if you had, like I said, ones that if you wanted to serve, I was kind of scrolling through here, serve a project and a backend project and a front end project in parallel, like say you can use the parallel flag there with the commands that you want to run, and the run commands takes control over that, or listens to those processes so that you can monitor them the same way you would if you ran them like manually using run mini. So definitely you can, like I said, package those up into a builder, and then you just run the command to run the builder instead of the run mini and having to collect all the projects and things that you want to run.
Yeah, this is great. Actually, what I had seen recommended was sort of using run mini before, but using run commands is awesome, because then if you're also using the NX console plugin for VS Code, now that command is something that shows up inside of that command panel that we have available for you, and you're not running just like an npm script somewhere. It's something that you can actually reason about, and it's all contained within NX, as opposed to having certain things where it's like, okay, sometimes you do NX run and sometimes you do npm run, and you can have aliases back and forth between those couple of things. But I really like the solution with run commands. I hadn't seen that before. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was one of those things, like I had used NX before, and then some stuff you don't find out until you actually start working here. Like I never knew that thing existed. So, and I've been, like you said, you set up your scripts to manually do those things, and then once you find that, you can easily switch over to doing that instead.
Yeah, I'm actually working on something for a client of ours right now, where they, for their integration tests, they want to run like a mock server that serves up data that's specific to their end-to-end test, and run, serve up the application and then run end-to-end tests on top of that. So something like that where we need to have like this. And right now they have it set up so that you're actually like opening up like 3 different terminals and running each of these commands, because they just got started using an X. And so if we can do that same thing with like a single run command, like that's like such a huge time save for them. So that's great.
Mm-hmm. So is that part of your toolbox now when we kind of go into new projects that are just in starting to use NX and they have a lot of scripts? That's what we normally, I'll say that's at least what I recommend anyway. If they have a lot of like offhand scripts that you can bundle up using run commands.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Okay, let's see. If you see any in the chat, you're welcome to point them out. I'm just kind of scrolling through here to see which ones. Let's see. First, NX for builders and schematics together. Let's see. Well, I guess this was a follow-up on that one. Also for EDE testing, is there an easy way to start backend services similar to start server and test NPM package? And I think that kind of still falls into the use and run commands for running multiple tasks that kind of need to run in sequence. I'll plug our other Nrwl, Zach DeRose, who ran into this also because he's running live streams on Twitch where he's building a social media application from scratch. And he was writing tests for the application, and he wanted to basically wanted to clear the database and like reseed it with some new data every time he started up during the EDE test. And using, like I said, using run commands would be a way to execute the command to clear the database and then have it seeded with new data and then run the end-to-end test all in one go.
Yeah, and I mean, even if those are like separate commands, it could be onerous to like have that all within the architect builder configuration. You can also like roll that all up into like just like a TypeScript script that you would run with TS Node. So there's a lot of different ways of like breaking these down into different levels. One question that I have though is like for end-to-end testing. End-to-end tests will end eventually. And so if you're running things in parallel like that, if I'm running like my backend mock and a server and my end-to-end tests on top of that, will the end-to-end tests ending trigger a stop to the other commands there, or do we?
I don't think so. I think you would probably have to do something a little more manual to maybe control kill the command in that particular case. I haven't had to do that specifically, but yeah, if they're all 3 running in parallel, you still need to have some way to say, when that ends, I guess when that ends to stop the process, so it considers it to be done, so it doesn't just run forever. But
cool.
Yeah, I haven't ran into that one specifically, but yeah, I was just thinking about it. You have to have some signal that would tell it that you're done.
Yep.
In case that you're combining those together.
Cool.
Another one here is, when will NX support eslint as an option during the creation of Angular libs? As of version 9, the step is achieved manually by replacing the tslint block with eslint. We, just to cover that one, we recently, and I think this went out with 10.1, is that you can use eslint as an option with Angular projects now. And we've had support for eslint for non-Angular projects for a while. But because it wasn't officially supported by like the Angular, I guess, upstream Angular CLI as an option. And of course, with the Angular roadmap recently, saying that they were going to move to, eslint as part of the future roadmap.
For sure.
But we already knew that we had something in place to support that. So I guess it was a matter of enabling it and letting people use it. So you can choose eslint as an option in, I believe it's 10.1 for a 10.1 version of NX. So definitely try that out. And of course, if you have any feedback for us, let us know about that, so we can make that better. Like I said, we already had a Nrwl linter package in place there to handle both eslint and tslint. So yeah, check that out. Like I said, if it doesn't work the way you expect, just let us know, and we'll let us know, and we'll take a look. And actually, Jason chimed in on the ET runner handles ending the server. So
there we go.
So I guess that would you would be covered in that scenario. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason. That's my other solution to any NX problem that I run into. Go ask Jason, but not everybody has like Slack access directly to Jason. Sorry.
There you go. Okay. I thought I was the only one, but it's good that I'm not the. And Jason's always willing and ready to help, so which is nice.
Oh yeah, Jason's the best. Anyone who has not worked with Jason before, you're really missing out. And this is what's great about working at Nrwl, is like everybody is kind. Everybody's willing to help. I've heard so many times from other Nrwl colleagues of like, I don't know how to do that, but I can still help. And just that ability to like just be kind and want to help with folks. It's great. So Jason Jean, everybody, don't hire him away. Like, we're not like telling you he's great.
We're not telling you how great he is, so you can like come poach him from us. We just want to share the love that we have.
But he's on Twitter at Frozen Pandas, I think, and definitely check out.
I think I'll put his name up there again, so you can see who he is and his handle up there. Frozen Pandas on Twitter. So definitely,
he's the best, and he knows everything.
You're welcome, Jason.
You're welcome for those mentions now.
Yes. Okay. So this one is a pretty easy one. Is there a list of answered NX office hours questions somewhere? One thing we have been doing in recent episodes of NX office hours is adding the questions asked and the the time markers to the show notes on the YouTube page. So those are definitely searchable, and you should be able to look at, if you just go on our YouTube page for Nrwl and look for the NX office hours playlist, it'll show the list of previous shows, and then you can kind of scan through and see what questions have been asked there previously. And some of the questions we covered multiple times just because we are getting new users to NX, and they may not have known the answer to that question before, or may not have seen that question before, even if they've searched around some. So some of these we cover just because they're good topics to cover, and they are continually in the front of people's new users' minds, which is good. So, and those are things, of course, we can then turn into docs that people can take advantage of also.
For sure.
Let's see. I saw how workspace builders, workspace schematics. This one, our workspace schematics and workspace builders meant to be used together, and meant to be used together. And my answer to that would be yes. You can use. Well, I think the first option there is to use NX plugin if you want to use builders and schematics and use those things together within a workspace, because it provides the tooling and the testing that you need to use a custom builder or write a custom schematic within your particular workspace. So definitely look at using a plugin if you want to like something more of a packaged solution there for builders and schematics, which you can generate them separately. But like I said, using them together, having them together is a good option there in a plugin. And this name looks familiar to me, so we'll go with this one next. Mike Ryan, I know this guy. He said, I have a complex monorepo setup using Yarn Workspaces, a mix of shared libraries and hybrid Angular JS / Angular apps. What's the best way to migrate this to NX? And the best way is to contact Jeff. No, just kidding. But it's a good question. It's a good question. How long? And also asks, how long will it take? So this is a multi-part question. But if you're using Yarn Workspaces, my recommendation would be to look at consolidating, or over time consolidating to a single package JSON that has all your dependencies in it. That way you can have all the things that you need for all the applications that you're going to move into the monorepo, or move around in your monorepo. It already has one, but with Yarn Workspaces, you can have multiple package JSONs, sprinkled throughout the monorepo itself. And see, mix of shared libraries and hybrid Angular JS apps. I think shared libraries easily fits into the NX workspace model. So you can move those libraries, or either create libraries within your workspace to move those shared libraries into there, and then consume them amongst the Angular JS and Angular apps. And easily get that win there. And I know you had talked about, you had written an article about migrating Angular JS and to an Angular app within an NX workspace, and kind of how you organize your projects there.
Yeah, a little bit. So there's if you go over to nx.dev, under the migrations section, there is a from Angular JS, and that's an article that's really based on, I've got an Angular JS application, I want to put it into an NX workspace, and it's a great place to start, because I think it's going to begin to surface some of the sort of hurdles that you're going to have as you go through this. And so I think exactly what Brandon was talking about, we have concepts for shared libraries. We have, everything that you need to really get your code in. My assumption is going to be that if you've got a monorepo and you've got Angular and AngularJS hybrid apps, you probably have a non-trivial build pipeline to actually get all of that working together. And we've seen this with clients. The hard part is not necessarily getting the code into an NX workspace. It's migrating some of your build scripts. And so one of the things that I kind of walk through here is there's probably going to be multiple phases that you go through here, where, if you have had, if you have just node scripts or something like that that's building your application, then you might be able to just continue using those, and just copy them into your package.json, point them at new places, and go forward. But what you'll want to do, just like we were talking about earlier, is you probably want to start migrating some of those things into run commands. Especially for AngularJS, there's no native builder for NX for AngularJS. I don't know if there's, if anyone in the community has a plugin that does that. I'd love to see it. When I was building this, I had a custom Webpack build that was doing that. And so, this project in particular has to do some funky things with running gulp first to build all the AngularJS up, and then Webpack kind of bundles that. So you're probably going to run into something similar. You're probably going to have some custom Webpack configurations. We support all that, but you're going to have to sort of do the work of taking that build pipeline and migrating that over. And that's where how long will it take? I don't know how
It depends.
I
The
can't
answer is
answer
always, it
that.
depends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we don't know more specific. Well, I have an idea more specifically how many shared libraries are in the project that he's mentioning there, but I guess it depends on who's doing it. Like if you have a large app that you need to break down into smaller libraries, then of course that's going to take more time than if you already had a lot of the shared libraries in a place that you can kind of just move from one place to another. And I guess the good part about that is if you already have sort of a monorepo set up, then you can generate libraries and point those libraries at, let's say you have a shared space in your workspace already, or place for shared libraries. You can customize the path where your libraries live within your NX workspace configuration. So then if the paths are already good there, then you can generate your Angular configuration to point at those places for your libraries, and that already gives you a way to start moving into that single monorepo with multiple apps in there. And then it's like I said, it's still a matter of how do you move your Angular JS files to a place within the monorepo so that the NX workspace is aware of them, and then you have to update your Webpack configuration to be able to build it. Because when I worked on it before, it was more of the Angular JS and Angular parts were still separate, but we built like you said, you use the Webpack to build the Angular JS part of it, and kind of the Angular project consumes that build of the Angular JS part so that you can both have them both at runtime available. So it's like I said, it's still going to take some time to sort out all the dependencies, but once you have it all together, it becomes a little more straightforward.
Yeah, and unit test configuration is also going to have to be something that you look at, especially if your Angular JS code is still using Jasmine. The Jasmine configuration between Angular JS and Angular projects is pretty different. And so and this might be, somewhere where you create like a really quick workspace schematic that can spin up sort of libraries so that you're not copying and pasting a lot of stuff around. But I think the sort of the TLDR version of this is moving the code is less of a concern than all of the tooling and building and testing that you've probably built up inside of your current monorepo. A lot of that, it's not going to be recreating the wheel. It's going to be more trying to figure out what can we do first to get things up and running so that we're confident in our approach, and then begin to mature that over time.
Yeah.
And hey, reach out to Nrwl because we're always happy to contract with folks specifically for these really intricate situations where you want to migrate to NX, but you need some help doing so. So we will gladly contract with anybody to help that out. Reach out to Jeff Cross.
Yep, definitely a good point there. Like I said, we work with large companies where we can go in and help them with development, or if you just want to help us come in and get your large project integrated with NX or set up NX Cloud. Also got to give a plug for private NX Cloud that's in beta, I believe. So definitely reach out to Jeff for that. All of those options, reach out to Jeff. That's what I'm going to say on that one. But you did mention one thing that I did want to touch on, and that is mention a custom workspace schematic. And I mentioned it earlier also, for a custom workspace schematic for doing like a particular task in your workspace. And this came up as part of a conversation on Twitter of how do you implement what's called the SCAM approach, which is a single component and module, which is similar to what Angular Material does now also, where as opposed to you have like a feature and then that feature has 5 components in it, or some that component itself is contained within a module that's in there with like 5 other components or other pipes and things like that. And using the SCAM approach is where that component and a module is more self-contained. And I'm a fan of the pattern. I joke about the pattern because it's like, how do you get rid of ng modules where you add more ng modules? But at some point, if ng modules become optional, it helps put you in a position to where your component dependencies are already kind of isolated in that way. So I will share this article that talks about those, and then I'll do a quick demo of how you would use NX with a workspace schematic to do that. And I'll scroll back up to the top here just so we can get some plugs in here for in depth, where Lars wrote an article, this was last year, about tree shakeable components and optional ng modules. And he talks about the SCAM pattern in this article and how you can look at how you would set that up. So I guess in a nutshell, the SCAM pattern is, like I said, a single component and module for each thing in your, or for each, I guess, declarable in your application. And it helps, like I said, helps have those dependencies local and scope to where that component is. And then it gets right here where it talks about, like I said, single component Angular modules. We can't tree shake them or tree shake ng modules that well today. So it puts you in a path to migrate to that later on. So I'm going to say he coined the term. I know that some people had mentioned it before, but I think he maybe was the one that like formalized that particular term of it. So yeah, let's look at how we would generate that within just an example of how we would generate a single component and module within an NX workspace.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Sure.
So there's a lot of times where we treat the words like module and library kind of interchangeably, and especially when we're talking about ng modules, like they are not at all the same thing, right? And so especially when we're talking about NX libraries, you don't necessarily it doesn't have to be a one-to-one scenario with libraries and ng modules. You can have multiple ng modules for this approach inside of a single library.
Yeah.
Right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And you still get the tree shaking advantage, even though you're exporting multiple modules from the same library?
Yes, because if you're not using that library within, or you're using that ng module within a particular parts of your library, and you're using one or the other, it's not going to bring in both for that particular where you're consuming that library.
Excellent. Yeah. So I just wanted to like point out to anyone listening here, if you want to follow this pattern and look more into this approach, don't associate a single ng module with a library. When we scaffold your library using the schematic, we definitely stick a module in there simply because you can't do much without an ng module. But don't let that deter you. You can definitely follow this SCAM pattern without any concerns. And Brandon's gonna show you how to set that up with the workspace schematic.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna use this within, like I said, just so we have a little clarification there. I'm gonna work through this within the context of, I'm gonna generate a single component and module within this app, so that at least for the example's sake, we'll be generating that there. So what we'll do for the schematic is, in our workspace, is generate, move this to the side here. We'll start with generating a workspace schematic itself within the workspace. So I can nxg workspace. I can spell workspace schematic scam. And I will do a dry run just in case. So it's going to create tools under tools, schematics. We already have that folder there within your workspace. And what that's going to do is add the schematic there. And there are a lot of other mechanics that happen like underneath as far as running a schematic that you don't have to worry about when you're using it within an NX workspace. So that's pretty nice. So let's see, we have our schema here, which matches up with our schema JSON here, which just takes a name of what the name of what our component would be that would have its associated module. So we'll need a name, and we'll also need a project that is associated with that. I'm going to copy some of this and update it to project name, and I'm going to delete the rest of that. So I'll input the project as an argument to the schematic. So come back in here. And what I want to do is, I just have this typed as any now, but if you're creating like a full version of this, you would have a schema that would have an name, string, project, string. And then I'll replace schema with the interface. But what we want to do here is when you generate a new schematic, workspace schematic, you get a Nrwl workspace. We want to actually use the schematics Angular schematic, and we want to generate a module. And what we're going to do is pass that module the option of the name and the project. So that's going to generate the module that we want for our scam, and we'll also want to generate a component. And the same thing here, we're going to generate the name, project, and name here. And for the component, we want to add the export true to the name of the component when it's added to the module. So the names match there. I'll save this and this. I can run npx nx workspace. Run nx workspace schematic command, which is different from generating the actual schematic. This is going to run the schematic that we named here, which is just scam. And I'll name this my feature. And you have to provide a project, in this case, which would be my app, is already defined there. And I'll run it as a dry run. Works, okay. Okay, got an error. What did I miss? Schematics Angular. Did I miss? Oh, schematic Angular does not exist. Schematics Angular does. Try it again. Okay, so it goes through and it says it's executing a local schematic, goes into my app, generates my feature folder, and so it generates the module and the component. And I'll run this again without the dry run. We can at least look at the files there. Go into my app, source app, my feature, and it has all the normal things you could generate with a component, and then the module that the component would have, or the single component and the Angular module would already be inline there. And of course, if we wanted to set more defaults for the schematic, for the component, we could easily go in here and set like inline styles to true, and inline, I believe it's inline styles and inline template. to true. And that would, of course, if you're a fan of having everything in line as opposed to having separate CSS files and HTML files for your component, we could do that. If I got those correct, let's try it one more time. The dry run there. It should only generate a couple of files this time. Okay, so inline, maybe it's just inline style. Surprised it didn't give me a validation thing there. Okay, so now we got component and module, and of course, if I wanted to skip test, well, I'm not passing that there. I could also pass if I wanted to skip test to not generate a test with the component also. And if I want to maybe customize the schematic to generate something in addition to like maybe my own custom testing template for that component. So that's a way you could do that also. But like I said, within an NX workspace, creating a custom schematic is pretty straightforward. You know, I did this in 22 lines, and most of it was just me calling 2 commands. So definitely shows how easy you could do that within a workspace. Because you don't want to have to dive into what you have to do manually to do that in most cases.
Sure. Yeah, so this is great, and you know, again, like before I joined Nrwl, like I didn't do anything with workspace schematics, and now I'm kind of kicking myself because they're, you know, if anyone out there like finds themselves like during a code review saying, you know, you didn't run this schematic with the right options. You know, we always run it with SCSS and with like skip tests or something, because who needs unit tests? You know, if you find yourself doing that, that's catching the like mistake like so late in the process that it's really expensive to go back and fix that. If you have a really simple workspace schematic that does nothing but call an external schematic with a set of like predefined options, you're going to be so much better off. It's going to make your developers happy because they know they're doing the right thing the first time. Which is really important. You're not having to catch these kind of mistakes during code reviews. And you can, once you have that confidence in sort of your tooling and your infrastructure that things are going to be set up correctly, you can spend more time in your code review doing the things that you should actually be reviewing, like making sure that the logic is correct and that it runs. You know, I spent a lot of time as an architect, like pouring through like, your configuration file is wrong here. You know, go look at the Confluence document to make sure you set it up right. Whereas if I had just given them a schematic to do it right the first time, then everybody would have been a lot happier. And especially with those external schematics that you're just setting up, you know, those right here, Brandon was using the Angular schematics, but you can do that with any of the other external schematics. You know, you can do that with the NX schematics, the NGRX schematics. You know, all of those schematics tend to have a lot of options, and you probably want them done the same way every time. 22 lines of code saves you a ton of time down the road and a lot of frustration on your developer's part. So I really, really recommend everybody do what I didn't do, you know, 2 years ago and start using these.
Hey, I'm right there with you. But yeah, like I said, definitely we have a guide on workspace schematics, so definitely check that out in the docs, and we'll of course link that in the show notes. I think that's all the time we have for today. We'll go ahead and plug some things on Twitter. If you want to access questions for the next session of NX office hours, you can add NX Dev Tools on Twitter. You can also use the NXQA hashtag on Twitter if you have questions there. Also check out the website at nx.dev for it has our community page. We have docs there, links to NX Cloud. Like I said, if you want to integrate that, take more advantage of NX by integrating NX Cloud to sync across multiple teams and take advantage of the computation cache. There's that. I think I've gotten all my plugs in. Thank you, Philip, again for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. And
thank you to our community for using the tool, and again, like everybody seems really, really excited. You know, when we
Mhm.
talk, when we see folks on Twitter, when we see folks in the Slack community, like that excitement that we see from the community just like really fuels us to do even better, and make NX just that little bit more that it needs to be. So I really appreciate everybody in the community engaging in the way that you have already.
Yeah, definitely.
We're
So yeah, quick shout out to, I know there was, I know there's been plugins for NX Go by B-Man. I know there's a plugin for Python NX plugin for Python that was just recently released. So definitely look for those and check those out. And the one for Vue also. We have plugins all over the place, and you can definitely check those out at our in Nrwl community page. And don't forget to join our Slack channel. Anybody can join. Already has over 500 people there. So if you have other questions that we don't answer during office hours, definitely check that out also. And I think on that, we will see you next time.
all right.